Klingon bird of prey decloaking directly behind us.
Red alert, shields up. Fire torpedoes, full spread. As many as we can.
As many as we can, Captain? That takes some time to animate.
Just fire as many as we can afford.
Hey, and welcome to Making FX. TV budgets being what they are, it can get expensive firing all those phaser bolts on photon torpedoes. And even if money isn't an issue, it can still be a pain to manually animate your missiles, quantum torpedoes or what have you, and then add in the explosions. The photon torpedo look was created by firing a laser through a piece of crystal mounted on a rotating rod. I read that in IMDb's trivia page for Star Trek The Motion Picture. Hey, it's a slow movie. So the original idea for this tutorial was to show how to use shape layers to simulate the look. But as I was assembling it, I realised it was pretty niche, and I wondered how I could take it to the next level, where I can speed up animating by using a precomp, time remapping, and a neat expression so the torpedoes explode on impact, or in this case, when they reach the second position keyframe. And that opens up all sorts of possibilities. And of course you don't have to use it for photon torpedoes. So first off, I'll break down how you could make a shape layer photon torpedo, then I'll get into making an essential graphics precomp, which also allows you to add multiple explosion videos and sound effects. Let's get started. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a comp, 500 pixels by 500. 30 frames per second and 10 seconds long. That should be long enough, but you could always adjust it if your explosion stock footage is longer. Okay, next we need a shape layer, and to get a shape directly in the center of the layer and the comp, I'm going to switch the rectangle tool to the star tool and double click it. And now I'll expand this on the timeline. Yes, I know the properties exist and some people got very excited about that panel, but they tend to be the ones who got excited about color coding keyframes. Anyway, let's delete the stroke. And in Polystar 1 path, set the points to 7, the inner radius to 6, and the outer to 44. Now, using the tiny add menu, add a gradient fill, and delete the existing fill. In gradient fill 1, set the type to radial, and set the endpoint to be 0 and 44. 44 being the same as the outer radius of the star. Click on Edit Gradient, and set both colours to a Photon Torpedo red. And then select the opacity stop petal, and drop the opacity to 0, so the gradient fades out. Nice. Next, hold Alt and click on the Polystar's rotation stopwatch, and type time times 300, so it automatically spins. Select the whole shape, Polystar 1, and holding Ctrl, tap D to duplicate it, and again. In Polystar 2, set the points to 5, the inner radius to 2 and the outer radius to 80, and edit the rotation expression to become time times minus 150, and edit the gradient endpoint too. So we're starting to get a bit of that organic looking randomness. In Polystar 3, set the points to 3, the inner radius to 2 again, and the outer radius to 100. And for the rotation, let's use time times 200. For the central bright spot, switch the star tool to the ellipse tool and double click it. In ellipse 1's path, set the size to 10. Delete the stroke, and because we've added this to the same layer as the other shapes, it has retained the gradient fill. So set the endpoint to 0 and 6. And in Edit Gradient, pick a light orangey pastel shade. I went with FFC892. Collapse all the shapes if you haven't already, and using the blending modes, set them all to screen. so we get a bit of interplay between them. Now this isn't looking too bad, but we can do a bit better by introducing some irregularities. Create a new ellipse on the layer, and in its path settings, uncheck the infinity symbol on the size, which will let us adjust the width and height differently. Set the width to 150 and the height to 18. Delete the stroke again. And in its transform settings and for the anchor point, set the X value to -70, so it still covers the center but sticks out. In its transform rotation, hold Alt and click on the stopwatch, and this time type wiggle, brackets, 1,300, close brackets. So now we're getting this random, almost spinning but not quite movement. In its gradient settings, set the start point to be -75 and 0, and the end point to be 75 and 0. And you can either edit the gradient again to match the polystar settings, or you can copy the colors property from one of the polystars and paste it onto this color. And drop the opacity down to just 15%. But it's starting to get confusing, so make sure Ellipse 2 is selected and hit enter, and rename this shape to Outer Glow. And set its blending mode to screen as well. I'm also going to drag the Outer Glow shape down to the bottom of the stack, and then duplicate it twice. With the whole layer selected, go to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, CC Radial Fast Blur, and then go to Effect, Color Correction, Levels, and drag in the right hand input white handle down to accentuate the central glow. Maybe drag the middle handle towards it a little to retain more of the red colour. And that's it for the Photon Torpedo look! But now, let's turn the whole comp into an essential graphic which will allow us to use it again and again, but with slight tweaks. So many years ago, I bought a collection of explosions and fires called Pyromania Pro. They are SD image sequences and work well enough, but really you just need to find some royalty-free stock footage explosions. There are quite a few being offered for free these days. In my comp, I'm going to go to the 5-second mark, and then I could either hit page down to move one frame forward, or I could just turn the dial on my really cool Stream Deck Pro, which I paid for from Ko-fi donations. Thank you, thank you, thank you! Review coming soon. So at 5 seconds in one frame, I'll now add my explosions from the project window, and line each up and scale them down, and set their transfer modes to add. Transfer or blending mode? There's probably a difference, but I keep using them interchangeably. Okay, now that they are done, back on frame 1, I'll go to Layer, New, Null Object. Hit enter and rename this to Controller. And then I'll go to Effect, Expression Controls, drop down Menu Control, and hit enter and rename this effect to Explosion. I'll then click the Edit option and rename item 1 to Aerial Explosion, and item 2 to Fiery Explosion, and delete item 3. Obviously if you have more explosions you wouldn't delete item 3. On my first explosion layer, I'll hit T to expose the transparency property, and hold Alt and click on the stopwatch, and then type if, open brackets, and use the expression pick whip to link to the menu. Equals equals 1, close brackets, open curly brackets, 100, close curlies, else, open curlies, 0, close curly brackets. Yes, I know they're called braces, but this way I get to annoy some people. Now, copy the expression and paste it into the other explosion's opacity expression area, but change the equals to 2. We can now switch final looks just from that drop-down menu. Oh, and at 5 seconds and 2 frames, select the shape layer, then hold Alt and tap on the closing square bracket key. This trims the shape animation for us. Okay, next is sound effects. I found this website, trekcore.com/audio, packed with authentic Star Trek sound effects, so I grabbed the explosion noises. I may as well use the same drop-down menu, although it would be simple enough to include a second one. On the first sound effect, expand it on the timeline until you can see the audio levels. Hold Alt and click on the stopwatch and paste in the same expression you used on the opacity. But this won't be right, so let's edit the expression. Replace 100 with the word value, and replace 0 with square brackets minus 192, comma, minus 192, close square brackets. And copy this expression to your clipboard. And then paste this into the other audio layer's audio level, changing the 1 to 2 again. Minus 192 is the lowest audio level. And using value makes it easy to adjust the sound if it's too quiet or too loud. Okay, so this is all very well, but it does currently mean each photon torpedo has to be on screen for exactly 5 seconds. Let's change that. Go to Composition, open in Essential Graphics. And name it Photon Torpedo, or Missile if you're not using it for a photon torpedo, or whatever it is you're using it for. Expand the controller layer on the timeline until you can see the menu, and drag this into the Essential Graphics panel. In a new comp, the one for your space scene, drag in the Photon Torpedo comp from the project panel, and set its transfer mode to screen. And if you expand it on the timeline, you can see the Essential Graphics properties and where you can alter the explosion. Make this a 3D layer, then go to Layer, Transform, Auto Orient, and set it to always face the camera. Then go back to Layer, and this time Time, enable Time Remapping. Now set keyframes for the layer's position. These don't need to be the whole length of the comp, just whatever looks right to you. On the Time Remapping property, hold Alt and click on the stopwatch to once again add an expression. The expression is in the description below as there's quite a few steps, some of it adapted from Dan Eberts of course. Taking a quick look, first I declare the end of the loop, 5 being 5 seconds, which corresponds to the moment before I have the explosions appear. var end explosion is the end length of the comp. This means I don't have to worry about trimming the comp to the exact end of the explosion. Next, we say P is the comp's position property, and val is the time remapping value, which we'll set to 0 to begin with. Next, we check P as at least one keyframe, before we determine the time of the nearest keyframe, so that we can work out the second keyframe's time. That's the point where we need the explosion triggered. Then we add this second keyframe's time to the length of the explosion. If the time is less than that, we play the explosion using the linear expression, and then we hold at the end of the precomp. But if the time has not yet reached the second keyframe, we'll loop the first half of the comp until it does. Pretty neat, huh? Okay, one last element. We've got the explosion sound, but what about the launching sound? This one. If we add that to the precomp, every time the loop starts again, it will play again. But we know when the loop ends. So, in the precomp, add in the photon sound effect. Thank you, Trek Code. And then in the main comp, expand the audio properties and open its expression area and type. var end loop equals 5 semicolon. If brackets time is less than this layer dot start time plus end loop, note the capital letters, pipe, which means or, and can be added by holding shift and tapping on the left slash key, time remap is greater than end loop. Close brackets, open braces. Value, close braces, else, open braces, nah, sod this, open curly brackets. Square brackets, minus 192, comma, minus 192. Close squares, close curlies. So, if the comp's time is less than the start time of the layer plus the end of the loop, or if the time remap value has started to count up because we're past the loop, then let's hear the audio. But if the comp's time is more than the first playthrough, turn it down. And once you have one photon sorted, just duplicate the layer and tweak the positions. And by doing this in 3D space, you can add a moving camera, so now you're not needing to worry about placing the explosions exactly right. Oh, and because the torpedo comps are set to always face the camera, if you adjust the Z rotation, you can create different looks, even when using the same explosion. And I've had no audio to edit in separately either. All the expressions can be found linked in the description below. They are text files in a zip file. And I've also included my version of the project as a separate link, which can be handy if you get stuck. You'll find both these links right next to the like and subscribe options. I've not been able to include the explosion stock footage under the terms of use, but if you search for free, royalty-free explosion, some should turn up. If you do know a source of free stock footage, please share it by posting in the comments below. We're a community after all.